The peach trees in the southeast corner of Harlan County, Kentucky, stood 14 feet tall and looked, in the words of one county extension agent who drove past them on a Tuesday in March of 2019, like somebody had lost their mind. Every trunk from the ground to about 3 feet up had been painted white. Not primed, not treated, painted. Flat white latex. The kind that comes in a 5-gallon bucket from the hardware store on the edge of town. The branches weren't touched. Just the trunks, a solid stripe of white on every tree in the orchard, 61 of them, standing in pale rows against the brown early spring hillside like a fence somebody had run out of wood for. The extension agent's name was Gerald Perdue. He had been advising farms in that county for 19 years. He stopped his truck. He got out. He stood at the edge of the orchard with his clipboard and looked at the trees for a long moment. Then, he got back in his truck and drove to the farmhouse and knocked on the door. The girl who answered it was 16 years old. Her name was May Combs. She was wearing an old canvas jacket and had white paint on her forearms. Gerald Perdue told her, as gently as he could manage, that she had made a mistake. Somebody had to write this one down or it would have been forgotten. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, take a second to subscribe before we go any further. The rest of it matters. The Combs farm sat on 43 acres in the Puckett Hollow area of Harlan County, just off a county road that turned to gravel about a quarter-mile past the mailbox. The orchard had been planted by May's grandfather, Dale Combs, in 1979, mostly Red Haven and Reliance peach varieties, good producers in a hard climate, chosen because they could tolerate a late frost better than most. Dale had run a small operation, sold to roadside stands and a couple of grocery buyers in Harlan and Middlesboro. Never got rich off it, but never went broke either. He died in September of 2017. May's mother, Linda, was his only child. She had grown up on that farm and moved back to it after her husband left, when May was 11. She knew something about the orchard, but not everything. Dale had kept a lot of it in his head, and some of it in a spiral notebook he stored in the drawer of his workbench in the equipment shed. March of 2019 was May's second spring managing the orchard on her own. Her mother had taken a job at the nursing home in Cumberland to keep the lights on. May rode the school bus, did her homework at the kitchen table, and then walked down to the orchard. Gerald Perdue sat in the kitchen that Tuesday and explained, with the patience of a man who had explained a great many things to a great many people, that painting tree trunks white was a practice from the 1950s and earlier. That it had been largely abandoned. That modern research suggested the benefit was negligible and that the paint could, in some cases, interfere with the bark's natural processes. He had a handout. He left it on the table. May thanked him and offered him a glass of water, which he declined. After he left, she went back to the orchard and finished painting the last 11 trees. Dale Combs had not been a man who talked much about what he knew. What he had was patience. The quiet, daily kind that doesn't announce itself. He had farmed that hillside for nearly 40 years through late frosts and dry Julys, and a blight in 1994 that took the whole eastern half of the county's stone fruit crop. His orchard came through it. Not entirely, but mostly. People asked him how. He generally said he didn't know exactly, and went back to whatever he was doing. What he did know, and what he had written down in fragments across the pages of the spiral notebook in no particular order, was what he had observed over 4 decades about the behavior of his specific trees on his specific hillside, in his specific county. Harlan County sits in the Cumberland Mountains. The hollows are cold. Air drains down the ridges overnight and pools in the low spots, which means the valley floors and the lower slopes can see temperatures 4 or 5 degrees colder than the hilltops, sometimes more, on clear nights in late February and March. Dale had watched his trees for years and noticed something. The damage he saw in late freeze events was worse on the south-facing trunks. The bark there would get warm on a sunny February afternoon, the cells would begin to ease out of dormancy, and then the temperature would drop hard after sunset. The bark would crack. Sometimes it would split. Sometimes the tree would lose a season or two recovering. Sometimes it didn't recover. He started painting the trunks white in 1988. The logic was not complicated. White reflects sunlight. A white trunk stays cooler on sunny winter days. Cooler trunk means the bark doesn't wake up early. Bark that doesn't wake up early doesn't get caught by the freeze that comes after. Dale had not read this in any university publication. He had worked it out by watching what happened and doing the opposite of what had been failing him. The spiral notebook had a page, undated, near the back, that said, in Dale's handwriting, "South-facing bark splits when it warms too soon. Paint it white. Keep it sleeping." May had found that page in November of 2018. She was 14 when she read it, 16 when she acted on it. Now, Gerald Perdue was not wrong, exactly. Research on tree trunk painting has produced mixed results over the decades. Some studies find benefit, others find little. The practice fell out of favor in many extension offices, not because it was proven harmful, but because the evidence for it was considered inconclusive. Perdue was doing his job. He was applying the consensus of his training to what he saw in front of him. He had logic. The logic just didn't account for one specific hillside in Puckett Hollow, where air pooled at the base of the slope on clear nights, and the south, facing bark of 61 peach trees, had a 40-year documented pattern of early break and freeze damage that Dale Combs had been quietly solving for since the second term of Ronald Reagan. That distinction between the general and the specific is the kind of thing that takes 40 years to learn and about 11 seconds to dismiss. Ray Feltner had been coming to the Harlan County Extension Office's annual fruit growers meeting since 1997. He ran a small apple and peach operation in the Lynch community, about 12 miles up the road. He was 60, 3 years old, had tobacco-stained fingers, and a green Case A cap that had faded to a color that wasn't quite green anymore. And he was the kind of man who showed up to meetings early and sat in the back row and didn't say much unless he thought something needed saying. He was at the March meeting when someone mentioned the Combs girl and the painted trees. He did not say anything then, but he drove past that orchard on his way home. He slowed down. He looked. He told his wife that night he thought the girl might know something. The spring of 2019 in Harlan County came on hard and then pulled back. 2 weeks of warm weather in late February pushed temperatures into the mid-60s, and then, on March 14th, a clear sky event dropped overnight lows to 22 degrees. The National Weather Service recorded it at the Harlan Airport. It lasted 3 nights. The Feltner orchard took damage on the south, facing leaders of 7 trees. 2 of them lost significant limb structure. He pruned them hard and waited to see what came back. In the Puckett Hollow orchard, 61 peach trees woke up in April with their bark intact. Not because of any luck, because the white paint on the trunks had reflected enough of that February sun to keep the bark cells from breaking dormancy early. They slept through the warm spell. They were still sleeping when the freeze came. They didn't feel it the way the unhardened trees did. May walked the rows in early April the way her grandfather had, slowly looking at each tree from the base up. She checked the bark with her thumbnail the way the notebook had described. A small press against the south-facing surface to feel for softness, for separation. The trees were solid. She wrote down what she found in a composition notebook she kept in the shed beside Dale's spiral one. The Redhaven trees bloomed 2 weeks later. The Reliance trees a week after that. The blooms held because the trees had not broken early, had not been caught mid-bloom by the March freeze, had not been forced to push growth into wood that was already compromised. By July, the orchard was carrying the heaviest crop May had seen in her 2 springs of managing it. She didn't have older records to compare against formally. But Ray Feltner did. He had been watching the Combs orchard for years as a neighbor watches things, without saying much about it, just noting. He came by in late July to buy a half bushel of Redhavens from the roadside stand May had set up at the end of the gravel road. He stood there for a moment looking back toward the trees. He said, "That's a good crop." May said it was. He asked if she'd painted the trunks again. She said she had, that she did it every February before the warm spells came. He bought his peaches and drove home. The following February, he painted the trunks of his own apple trees white. Not all of them. Just the ones on the south-facing slope where he had lost limb wood to freeze events 3 times in the last decade. He used the same flat white latex from the same hardware store. He has not lost a south-facing leader since. Gerald Perdue is still the extension agent for Harlan County. He is a good one. He drives a lot of gravel roads and answers a lot of questions and does not, so far as anyone knows, drive past the Puckett Hollow orchard anymore. There's no reason to think he's aware of how the spring of 2019 went for the Combs operation versus his own records. Nobody called to tell him. That's not how it works up in the hollows. May Combs is 19 now. She runs the orchard full-time and has added a small pick-your-own operation on weekends in July. She has 8 families that buy a standing order from her each season. She still uses Dale's spiral notebook. She keeps it in a gallon zip bag because the cover is coming loose, and she still keeps her own composition notebook beside it on the shelf. She paints the trunks every February. Flat white latex 5-gallon bucket before the first warm week comes through. She told someone once she isn't sure why she did what Dale had written, whether it was because she trusted him or because she didn't have any better ideas or some combination of the two, that she figured if he'd been doing it for 30 years and the trees were still standing. The notebook was probably worth following. It probably was the combination. Dale Combs spent 40 years paying attention to 61 trees on a cold Kentucky hillside. He didn't publish anything. He didn't present at any meetings. He just watched and wrote down what he saw, and eventually his granddaughter found the notebook and believed it. The knowledge of a place, the specific, unverifiable, accumulated knowledge of one hillside, one soil type, one pattern of cold air on clear March nights, doesn't transfer easily. It doesn't fit in a handout. It takes a long time to build, and not very long at all to dismiss as outdated. Sometimes it takes a 16-year-old with white paint on her arms to carry it forward. That's about all there is to it.